and welcome back to another episode of Cook With Me. Today we are turning our home-picked blackberries into an apple and blackberry crumble. So the first thing that we have to do is wash the blackberries. So I'd already put them in the colander and then realised that I hadn't washed them. So I'm just drizzling this tap water over them just to make sure that they're nice and clean, getting all the bugs out and any bits and bobs that might have been on them, because they were hand-picked out of hedgerows, so I don't want them having anything too grubby on them. I'd also picked up some elderberries, so there's the odd elderberry in there as well. So while we're letting the blackberries drain, I'm going to peel and chop up our apples. So I started off with my potato peeler here, as you can see, and then realised that I wasn't going to get anywhere very quickly. So I swapped over to my knife. So I'm chopping the apple pieces up into little squares and popping them into the pan. I have filled the pan with water because, as we're all taught, to stop the apples go brown, you put them into lemon juice. However, I learnt when I was a waitress, when our chefs were cooking any sort of apple crumble, apple and blackberry crumble, pies, that sort of thing, that to stop your apples go brown, you put them into water. And I was really confused as to why. And when I asked, they said that it's not specifically the lemon juice that stops your apples going brown, it's stopping them from oxidising, so getting any access to oxygen. So if they're wet, then the oxygen can't get to them. Now eventually they probably would go brown, but covering them with some water does prevent that from happening quick enough that you've got a load of brown apples. So I'll just give them a quick stir with the end of my knife or with my hand every now and then to make sure that the ones that have been put in a bit more recently go under the water or get covered with a little bit of water. So I've not got any cooking apples because they weren't quite in season. So I'm using Braeburn apples from the supermarket, and I've got quite a few here. I'm roughly doubling my recipe. The recipe calls for 3 medium cooking apples, peeled, cored and finely sliced. So I'm using quite a lot of small apples, and I'm roughly doubling it as well. I haven't weighed my apples because it gives you a number of apples instead of a weight. So we like our crumble with lots of crunch, so I'm popping quite a lot of apples in, and that'll give them plenty of crunch, hopefully. So the last few apples here. So what I do with the peelings, if I'd got any chickens, I would give them to the chickens, but I don't have chickens. I'm going to say yet because they are definitely a thing that I would like at some point in my future. And I just put this into our garden waste bin with any other fruit or veg that, like cut-offs or things that have gone past their best that I haven't managed to get round to using. I'll just pop those in that bin, and then they get taken with the grass clippings and the weeds that I pull up out the hedgerows or the driveway, and they go somewhere and get turned into compost, I hope. So I think this is the last apple. Just chopping that up nicely, showing you that I have got some apple peelings into what I've been turning my apple peelings into. And then it's time to drain the apples of the water, just like so. And shaking that water off them so that they are mostly apples, and throwing them all over the worktop. Nothing different than when I'm cooking. I'm always making a mess. There goes another one. So changing my tactics there, as you can see, to get the water off. So going to pop those apples that are not brown, they were definitely not brown, into the pan just like so, making sure I've got every last little one. And then it is time to put our spices in. So the recipe I'm using is an apple and cinnamon crumble, but because I'd got the blackberries, I've chosen to put the blackberries in as well. So the recipe calls for 2 teaspoons of ground cinnamon, but unfortunately I hadn't got very much cinnamon, so I am using exactly 2 teaspoons. And I am measuring it as well because I've got to put cinnamon into the crumble topping as well. So popping the cinnamon in here and measuring it out means that I should have enough to put some cinnamon into the crumble topping. I am also putting in some nutmeg, and this gives it a nice sort of Christmassy taste. And I'm putting exactly the same amount of nutmeg in as I have put in cinnamon. But because I don't use it very often, it does clump up, so there we go. Just making sure I'm getting the last little bit off. And then we now need 3 tablespoons of caster sugar. So because I'm roughly doubling the mixture, I am going to be putting 6 tablespoons in to start with, and then a little bit later on I do put some more caster sugar in. I don't want my crumble mixture, or my compote as some people will call it, I don't want my compote being too sour because of the blackberries. I have had crumbles in the past where they have been too sour when you've not put enough sugar in. So starting to mix it up just like so. The apple pieces are going to be more dense than the blackberries, so don't put the blackberries in straight away. I was there trying to make sure it was smelling nice, but I'd only just turned it on. So it wasn't going to be smelling of much just yet. So giving it a good old stir. And then I'm going to get the blackberries and pop those in. And to spill the juice on my hob. So I'm going to stir the first half in a little bit to begin with. As you can see, my pan was a little bit too small, so next time I will be using a bigger pan. And as I go, I'm just picking out any bits that hadn't gone down the drain that I notice. Just popping those extra blackberries in on the top there and give those a mix. So this is the dangerous bit, and you'll see why in a little while. I'm going to now, because my pot has got quite hot on the handles, I have to use my tea towel to hold the handles so that I can steady the pot while I'm mixing. But obviously trying not to burn my cloth is a very difficult task, which you will see in just a bit, because I do catch the cloth on the gas hob and it does light on fire. So letting that just mooch down a little bit and deciding there that there isn't enough juices, so adding some more caster sugar. My measuring cups and my measuring spoons are all from Amazon. They either came with a black handle or a multicoloured handle, and I did quite enjoy those multicoloured handles. So here we go, just stirring that caster sugar in and realising here somewhere that I can smell a little bit of burning. And there we go. I then try and blow it out, which doesn't work because of the oxygen. So popping it into the sink there to get it wet and put the fire out. You will hear in a minute my partner asking me to show him the cloth. So just clearing up after myself, because I think I'd spilt a little bit of sugar and cinnamon and nutmeg onto the work surface. And giving it another mix up, trying to get some of those bits that are at the top down towards the bottom so they go nice and soft.
Hello. What? Have a look at your incompetence.
Fine.
When did you notice it was burning?
When I could smell it. So giving it another good stir and turning it off just there. So I'm getting my Pyrex dishes out. I love using these for crumble because I can put the lid on and then I can stack them in the fridge. So there is quite a lot of juice, which once you've cooked it and then put it in the fridge, it does allow it to set a little bit. So it's not quite so runny when you're putting it into your bowl. So the recipe that I'm using says that you should be adding a splash of water, boiling water, before you finish. So it says add a splash of boiling water, then bring the apples to a simmer and leave to cook, stirring occasionally for about 5 minutes until the apples have softened. This is one of those recipes where I kind of do my own thing while loosely following the recipe. So the apples and the blackberries produce plenty of juice, so I don't need to put any water in at all. Maybe if I wasn't doing blackberries, then it might be better if I had have put some boiling water in, but you can see yourselves that there is just so much juice that I really don't need to put any juice in at all. So just pouring the last ones in just there. And as you can see, like I just said, there is so much juice, you really don't need to be putting any water in with them at all. So I'm just going to spread those last ones out just there nicely. And then it's time for the crumbles. So I'd already measured my flour out, so the recipe calls for 2 cups of plain flour, but because I was doubling my recipe, or did I? Did I double the recipe? I think I did. So in here should be 4 cups of plain flour, but I was running out of flour, so I had to go and get some more. So I had to make sure beforehand that I'd got enough, which obviously I hadn't. So I'd already measured my flour out. And then measuring my butter out, my scales decided that there was too much in the bowl and they went back to 0. So because the recipe calls for 140 grams of butter cut into cubes, I then had to kind of roughly double what I'd got in my bowl. So once you've got your flour and your butter together, you then use your hands and rub the butter and the flour together to make a breadcrumb mixture. So the next step after you've done your apples and your blackberries is to make the crumble. Put the flour and butter in a large mixing bowl, then rub the butter into the flour with your fingers to create a golden rubble that resembles breadcrumbs. So it does take a while, which is why I have increased the speed of this, because it would be so boring watching me make breadcrumbs for probably about 10 minutes, because there is quite a lot, so I have to spend quite a while making sure that it's all as it should be. So I put my scales away because they are absolutely no use. I'm then going to add my sugar and cinnamon to the bowl, but because I'm using a little bit of nutmeg, I also put some nutmeg in. So here I am scooping my sugar into a cup to measure exactly 1 cup, because the recipe calls for half a cup, so doubling my recipe is 1 cup. My cups don't fit into my sugar, which is really frustrating. So just sprinkling the last of my cinnamon, because it was going to be too much of a faff to measure it out, and then sprinkling my nutmeg in as well, and just giving it a mix with a spoon. And it does take a little bit longer than this, which is why I have cut ahead. So setting that to the side, and then before I bring my dishes over, I am good. Cleaning the work surface because I'd got sugar and flour all over it. So bringing over the dishes, this is another time lapse because I was trying to be very careful pouring my crumble mixture into the dishes so that I didn't completely mess up my freshly cleaned work surface. Just spreading the crumble over, and I realise now that I had probably squashed it down a little bit too much. You'll probably be able to see that at the end. So onto the second one. So what I did was I'd got all of these and I got no freezer room, which was so frustrating. So what I did is, our next door neighbours who loved the crumble last time, I gave them the middle baking dish because they're just so lovely. So here we go, popping the biggest one on the top, and I pop them on a baking sheet because if they bubble over then it doesn't make a mess of the oven, but also when it's time to take them out of the oven, it's so much easier because I'm not having to grasp hold of the dishes. So just popping the spare breadcrumbs or the crumble topping into a bag, and then what I'll do with that is I'll freeze it. So just popping a couple of bits away that I can do, and then getting on with the worst part, the dishes. The bit that we all have to do, unfortunately, if we enjoy cooking. And what I'd got here was all the stuff that I'd used for baking, as well as the pizza that my partner and his friend had for lunch, because they're outside cleaning cars. So I said, I'm not cooking anything special. I'll just throw a pizza in before I start cooking, and then at least my oven's warm when I come to put the crumble in. So I wish cleaning the dishes and doing the dishes was this quick, but as you can tell, we are doing a time lapse. I then rinse all the bubbles out. It's quite funny because you can see my partner out the front cleaning the cars, and then we wipe down the surfaces in the sink, making sure that that's all clean and dry, and then doing the same on the other side here, because again I had got crumble topping all over my work surface and it's so frustrating. I'm such a messy cook. I'm just one of those people that I just can't cook without making a mess. You'll have probably noticed that when I'm serving my HelloFresh meals, that I just make such a mess. I should probably use a bigger spoon, but I've already started using my wooden spoon. But hey ho, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So, here we go. My dog had been kept out of the kitchen while I was cooking, so I'm just giving her a little bit of fuss. My dog is a cockapoo. Her name is Gracie, and I've had her from when she was a puppy. She is now 9 years old, my little sweetheart. So, in that time, about 30 minutes had gone by. Yeah, 30 minutes, just checking. And I'm just checking and they are bubbling nicely. So when you're cooking, the oven needs to be 180 degrees Celsius, 350 Fahrenheit or gas mark 4. Once the oven is hot, cook the crumble for 30 to 35 minutes, covering with tin foil if the top starts to catch, which it didn't. It was lovely. So until golden and bubbling. Scoop into serving bowls and serve hot with lashings of custard, cream or ice cream alongside. Or if you're going to freeze it, you can leave it unbaked, and once it has cooled, cover it with a lid or wrap in foil and it'll freeze for up to 3 months. So this is the recipe. I will pop the recipe in the description. It is a lovely cookbook by this lovely lady who is on the front, the Batch Lady, and these are the crumbles. Thank you so much for watching. I had so much fun, and we'll see you again next time. Bye bye.